Aliens sent diplomats. Then Earth's Titan-class warship entered orbit. The thing about the Marathi delegation was that they arrived smiling. Not the careful, diplomatic smile that experienced ambassadors wore like armor. The genuine, warm, slightly condescending smile of people who believed they were doing someone a favor and expected gratitude in return. Ambassador Voss of the Marathi Dominion stepped off his shuttle at Geneva Orbital Station with that smile already in place, and it stayed there through the formal greeting, through the security check his team insisted on performing themselves, through the elevator ride to the conference level, and into the room where Secretary of State Carol Reeves was waiting with her hands folded on the table and an expression that gave nothing away. Voss was 300 years old by Marathi reckoning. He had conducted 47 first contact missions for the Dominion, had negotiated 17 territorial agreements, had represented Marathi interests in 6 separate interstellar disputes, and had never once in 3 centuries of diplomatic work sat across from a species that surprised him. The Marathi were old. 4,000 years of spaceflight, 2,000 years of active expansion. A civilization so thoroughly established in this region of the galaxy that most younger species treated them the way young nations treated ancient empires, with a mix of respect, resentment, and the quiet assumption that the ancient empire's way of doing things was simply how things were done. He expected Earth to behave accordingly. He sat down across from Reeves and opened with the standard Marathi welcome framework, which he had delivered 47 times and which was designed to establish, gently and without explicit statement, the relative positions of the two parties. It was elegant work. It acknowledged humanity's achievements, expressed Marathi admiration for what Earth had accomplished in its brief period of spaceflight, and positioned the Dominion as a benevolent senior presence interested in helping humanity navigate the complexities of galactic civilization. All of it was genuine in its way. The Marathi were not cruel. They simply had a very clear understanding of how the galaxy worked and where everyone fit within it. Reeves listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Ambassador Voss, thank you for coming. Before we get into the substance of what you've proposed, I need to share something with you. It's relevant to everything we're going to discuss today, and I think it's better that you have it now rather than later." Voss maintained his smile. "Of course." Reeves touched a control on the table in front of her. The room's display wall came to life, not with charts or diplomatic documents, but with a live feed from Earth's orbital sensor array. It showed space. Specifically, it showed the space approximately 40,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, in the high orbital band where the largest structures in Earth's growing space infrastructure sat. It showed a ship. Voss looked at the display. He looked at it for a long time. His smile did not disappear. He was 300 years old and far too experienced for his expressions to betray him without permission, but something behind it changed. Something that had been settled and comfortable shifted into something more careful. The ship on the display was large. Not large by the standards of Marathi heavy fleet vessels, which ran to several kilometers in length and represented 4,000 years of accumulated naval engineering, but large by any reasonable standard, and built in a way that the Marathi engineering assessment his team would file later would describe, in the careful language of people who had not expected to be impressed, as beyond projected human capability. "That," Reeves said, "is the UES Dominion. She entered final orbit this morning. She's been in service for 8 months. A pause. She's not our largest active vessel." The room was very quiet. Voss looked at the ship on the display for another moment. Then he looked at Reeves. "Secretary Reeves," he said. His voice was exactly as composed as it always was. "I think we should start from the beginning." She nodded. "I think that's a good idea." She set down her hands and began to talk, and what she said over the next 4 hours would eventually be summarized in the Marathi diplomatic archives under the heading, "First Contact Revision, Earth, with a notation that read simply, "Assessment requires comprehensive update," and a secondary notation added 6 months later by a different archivist that said, "The original assessment was not wrong so much as it was measuring the wrong things entirely." But that was later. Right now, it was just two people in a room, one of whom had come expecting a certain kind of conversation, and one of whom had spent 3 years preparing for the conversation they were actually going to have, and outside the window 40,000 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, a ship that should not have existed yet held its orbit with the patience of something that had been built to wait. Carol Reeves had joined the State Department at 26. She had spent 12 years working in conventional Earth diplomacy, trade agreements, territorial disputes, the ordinary complicated business of nations that shared a planet and could not agree on how to share it. She had been good at it. Good enough that, when the Interstellar Affairs Division was created 11 years ago, after humanity's first confirmed detection of active alien communication signals, she was one of the 8 people moved into it. She had spent the next 11 years preparing for today. Not specifically today, not this exact meeting, with Ambassador Voss specifically, but for the moment when a Marathi delegation arrived, which her division had projected as a high-probability event within a 15-year window, based on everything they had been able to learn about Marathi diplomatic patterns from 11 years of very careful listening. The Marathi were thorough. When they identified a species approaching spaceflight capability, they monitored that species for decades before making contact. They built detailed profiles. They developed specific diplomatic approaches tailored to the species' psychology and history, and what the Marathi assessed as the species' needs. Then they arrived, smiling with the genuine warmth of people who had prepared something thoughtful, and they delivered the framework they had built, and they waited for the response they expected. They expected gratitude, maybe some initial resistance. That was normal. Young species were sometimes proud, but ultimately they expected the response of a civilization that recognized, however reluctantly, that the Marathi knew things they did not know and had been doing this for much longer, and that working within a Maratha-shaped framework was simply the sensible choice. Reeves had spent 11 years on the question of what happened when the expected response did not come. She had spent 3 of those 11 years on a specific sub-question. How do you tell a 4,000-year-old civilization that the framework they built for you doesn't fit, without making them feel that their work was disrespected, without starting a conflict neither side wanted, and without pretending to accept a position that was not accurate? The answer she had arrived at after 3 years was, you tell them the truth immediately and completely, and you give them something concrete to look at while you do it. The concrete thing was the Dominion. She had not planned the timing of the ship's arrival specifically for this meeting. That was a coincidence, though a welcome one. The Dominion's orbital assignment was operational, not diplomatic. But when she had learned 3 weeks ago that the Marathi delegation was 2 weeks out, and that the Dominion would be entering high orbit within days of their arrival, she had made a decision. She had briefed the ship's captain, a man named Jake Cole who had been running capital ships for 20 years, on the diplomatic context. She had asked him to maintain high orbit during the delegation's visit rather than transitioning to the standard naval station. She had asked him to be visible. He had said, "Understood, and ask me if you need anything else." She had not needed anything else. The Dominion was doing what she needed it to do by existing and being in the right place. Voss listened to her for 4 hours. He was an exceptional listener, 300 years of practice, and he asked questions that were precise and intelligent, and that revealed, as good questions always do, what the questioner already understood and what they needed clarified. He understood Earth's diplomatic history. He had clearly read everything his team had assembled. What he had not understood, and what he was visibly and carefully updating as she spoke, was the pace. The pace of human development. The rate at which things that should have taken decades had taken years. The gap between what his team's models predicted Earth would have accomplished by now and what Earth had actually accomplished. After the fourth hour, he asked, "The Dominion, its drive specifications." "I'll have our technical division prepare a briefing document," she said. "We're comfortable sharing the basic parameters." "I'm not asking for specifications," he said. "I'm asking whether what I'm looking at on that display is consistent with what your technical division would call current generation." She met his eyes. "No," she said. "The Dominion is 2 generations behind our current development." Voss was quiet for a moment. 2 generations, he repeated. "Yes." He looked at the display again, at the ship in orbit. "How long has humanity been in space? Genuine interstellar capability." 63 years, she said. He sat with that. 63 years. The Marathi had spent their first 63 years of interstellar travel learning to reliably reach their nearest neighboring star system. The ship on the display was 2 generations behind current human development, and it was something his engineering team had not expected to see for another 40 years. "Secretary Reeves," he said carefully, "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me directly, because I think we are both past the point where indirect communication is useful." "I agree," she said. "Is there something about human development, the rate of it, the nature of it, that is not what it appears to be? That is not simply a matter of human ingenuity being underestimated?" He paused. "I have conducted 47 first contact missions. I have watched species develop from pre-spaceflight to interstellar capability. The curve is not random. It follows patterns that 4,000 years of observation has made predictable. Humanity is not following the pattern." Reeves looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "We are following the pattern. We're just following it faster than the pattern expects." "Why?" "Because we were alone for a very long time," she said. "Longer than most species that achieve spaceflight. We had no contact, no interference, no external framework to work within or against. Every problem we solved from scratch. Every technology we developed because we needed it and there was no one to give it to us." She paused. "We also had a great deal of time to be afraid. Humans have known for a long time that the universe was large and that we were very small in it, and that somewhere out there, things existed that we did not understand. That fear is productive for us. It makes us move faster than is perhaps comfortable for people observing from outside." Voss looked at her steadily. "You've been expecting us." "We've been expecting someone," she said. "For about 30 years, you specifically for about 8. He was quiet for a moment. "And the Dominion's presence in orbit today." "Operational assignment," she said. "Genuine coincidence in terms of timing, but I decided to use it." She met his eyes. "Not as a threat, Ambassador. I want to be clear about that. As information. You came here with a framework built around an understanding of what Earth is. I needed you to have accurate information before we discussed that framework." He looked at the ship for a long time. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "That was the right decision." She looked at him. "If our positions were reversed," he said, "I would have done the same thing. The framework I brought was built on an incomplete model. An accurate model requires accurate data." He paused. "I am going to need to transmit a significant revision to our diplomatic planning division before we continue." "Take all the time you need," she said. "It will take several hours," he said. "The revision is substantial." "I expected that," she said. "We've arranged quarters for your delegation. There's food, we've done our best with Marathi nutritional requirements. When you're ready, we can continue." He stood, paused, looked at the Dominion one more time. "Secretary Reeves, the briefing document on the drive specifications. When your technical division has it ready, I would appreciate seeing it." "I'll have it sent to your quarters," she said. He nodded once, the nod of someone receiving something they did not expect to receive and are deciding how to hold it. Then he left with his delegation, and the room was empty except for Reeves and her aide Marcus Webb, who had been silent at the corner of the table throughout. Webb said he took it well. "He's 300 years old," Reeves said. "He's taken things much harder than this well." She looked at the display, at the Dominion. "Get me Captain Cole. I want to brief him on how the session went." Webb reached for his communicator. "And Marcus," she said. "Secretary. Order food, real food, not conference food. It's going to be a long night." He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Captain Jake Cole received Reeves's briefing at 1900 hour ship time, sitting in his command chair with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and his first officer, Lieutenant Dana Torres, standing at the adjacent station, both of them listening to the secretary's account of the afternoon. When she finished, Cole said, "How rattled was he, honestly?" "He's 300 years old and he's done this 47 times," Reeves said. "He wasn't rattled, he was recalibrating, which for someone like that is significant." "Did he ask about the weapon systems?" "Not directly. He asked about the drive specifications, which tells you what he was really thinking about." A pause. "He understands that a ship with that drive capability has weapons capability to match. He didn't need to ask directly." Cole looked at Torres. Torres was looking at the orbital display on his screen, where Earth turned slowly below them in the blue-white color of a planet that was doing fine, and had been doing fine for 4.5 billion years, and intended to continue doing fine. "What does she need from us?" Torres said. "Right now, just presence," Reeves said. "Stay in orbit, be visible. Don't do anything aggressive or even suggestive, just exist." "We're good at existing," Cole said. "I know," Reeves said. "That's why I asked for you specifically." A pause. "There's one other thing. The Marathi have a second vessel, a heavy cruiser, their standard escort for diplomatic missions. It's been holding at the edge of our sensor range since the delegation arrived. Standard Marathi protocol. We've had it on scope since before they dropped out of FTL," Cole said. "It's a Marathi Sovereign class, about 800 meters. Standard weapons loadout for a diplomatic escort." "I know," Reeves said. "They know we can see it. It's meant to be seen, same reason we have the Dominion in orbit. Both sides have something visible. I want to make sure your posture toward their vessel is completely non-threatening." "Our posture toward their vessel is that it doesn't appear in our threat assessment at all," Cole said, "which isn't a diplomatic decision. It just isn't a threat." A pause on Reeves's end. "Make sure that doesn't come through in your communications." Cole thought about that. "Understood," he said. "We'll be polite." The briefing ended. Torres looked at Cole. "It doesn't appear in our threat assessment at all," Torres repeated. "It doesn't," Cole said. "She sounded like she wanted you to be more diplomatic about that." "She did," Cole said, "which is fair." He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "Get me a fresh cup and then run the standard planetary defense rotation check. I want to make sure everything is exactly where it should be tonight." Torres went. Cole looked at the orbital display, at Earth below, at the edge of the sensor range where the Marathi escort cruiser was holding its position, patient and watchful. He had been running capital ships for 20 years. He had served on 3 different classes of vessel, had commanded 2, and had taken the Dominion through her sea trials 18 months ago when she was still being calibrated, and her systems were still being argued about by the engineers who had built her and the crew who were learning to live inside her. He understood the Dominion the way you understand something you have spent significant time inside, not just technically, but intuitively, the way a pilot understands an aircraft or a captain understands a sea. He understood what she was and what she could do, and what it meant for a ship like her to be in orbit above a planet, while diplomacy happened on a station below. She was not doing anything, she was not threatening anyone, she was simply present. In the way that very large things are present, without effort, without performance, simply by occupying space and being what they were. That was enough. That was, Cole had come to understand in 20 years of running ships that other civilizations were very interested in, usually more than enough. Voss spent 4 hours revising his transmission to the Marathi Diplomatic Planning Division. He was methodical about it. He had learned, 3 centuries ago and confirmed many times since, that the worst thing you could do after your model was proven wrong was to revise it too quickly. Quick revisions produce corrections that fix the most visible error without accounting for the deeper assumptions the error was built on. He had watched colleagues make that mistake and spend years working from models that were technically updated but structurally still wrong in the ways that mattered. He took 4 hours because the revision required him to go back to the fundamental assumption that humanity was a young spacefaring civilization that had accomplished impressive things at an impressive pace, and examine what was actually wrong with it. What was wrong with it was not the assessment of humanity's achievements. Those were accurate. What was wrong was the assessment of what those achievements meant. The model assumed that a species 63 years into interstellar travel was early in its development. That assumption was reasonable for every species the Marathi had ever encountered. It was not reasonable for humanity. For humanity, 63 years of interstellar travel was not early. It was the end of a very long beginning. The species had spent 200,000 years of cognitive development, 10,000 years of recorded history, 300 years of industrial and scientific revolution, and 63 years of space development, reaching a point that the Marathi model predicted would take another 4 decades to achieve. The model was treating the rate as constant. The rate was not constant. The rate was accelerating. Voss wrote that in his revision. He wrote it carefully, and he made sure the planning division understood what it meant for the framework they had built and for the mission he was currently on. Then he wrote something else. Something that was not standard in a diplomatic revision transmission, not the kind of thing that typically appeared in official communications between a field ambassador and his planning division. He wrote, "I want to tell you what I saw when Secretary Reeves showed me the Dominion on the orbital display. I have seen many ships in 300 years. Large ships, powerful ships, vessels built by civilizations that had been working on the problem for millennia. I have my own civilization's fleet to compare against, which represents 4,000 years of naval engineering. What I saw on that display was not impressive in the way that impressive things usually are impressive. It was impressive in the way that something is impressive when it is more advanced than it should be, when the gap between what you expected and what you are looking at is large enough that you have to pause and verify that your instruments are correct. The ship was 2 generations behind current human development. I am still integrating what that means." He sent the transmission. Then he went to dinner, because it was late and he needed food, and the Marathi nutritional requirements the human delegation had prepared for were close enough to be considerate, and he appreciated the consideration. His aide, a young diplomat named Sira, who was on her first interstellar mission, sat across from him at the small table in his quarters. "Sir," she said, "the drive specifications briefing document came through from the Human Technical Division." He looked up from his food. "Already?" Secretary Reeves apparently asked them to prioritize it. Sira slid the document across the table. "I read it before bringing it to you." "And?" She was quiet for a moment. Sira was 28 years old and had grown up on the Marathi homeworld and had studied interstellar diplomacy for 6 years and had read every mission brief Voss had ever filed. She was not easily surprised. "Sir," she said carefully, "I think we may need to revise the revision." He looked at the document. He read it slowly, the way he read things that required careful reading. When he finished, he set it down and picked up his food and ate several bites in silence. Then he said, "The Dominion is 2 generations behind." "Yes, sir. This is current generation." "According to the document." "Current generation," he said again, with the specific quality of someone saying a phrase to make it real by saying it. He looked at the document on the table. Sira. Sir, when we return from this mission, he said, I am going to recommend to the High Council that we establish a permanent liaison office on Earth, not an occasional diplomatic presence. A permanent office, fully staffed, with direct line access to the Council. He paused. I am also going to recommend that we suspend 3 current expansion initiatives in this region pending a comprehensive review of how those initiatives look in the context of what we now know about Earth's trajectory. Sira looked at him steadily. The expansion initiatives have been in planning for 6 years. I know, he said. They were planned in the context of the old model. He picked up the document and looked at it one more time. This is a different context. She was quiet for a moment. Sir, Secretary Reeves said the Dominion is not a threat. She was correct, Voss said. The Dominion is not a threat. A threat implies hostile intent, and I believe her when she says there is none. He set the document down. A thing can be significant without being a threat. The Dominion is significant. What it implies about what comes after it is significant. He looked at his young aide. In 47 missions, I have never revised a transmission twice in one evening. I am going to do that tonight. He stood. Help me draft it. The second session began the next morning, and it was different from the first. Not because either party had changed their fundamental position. Reeves still represented Earth's interests, and Voss still represented the Marathi Dominion, and nothing about either of those facts had changed overnight. What had changed was the architecture of the conversation. The first session had been, underneath its professional surface, about establishing what was true. Voss had arrived with a model, and Reeves had spent 4 hours demonstrating that the model required revision. That work was done. The second session was about what happened next. Reeves opened it by saying, Ambassador, I want to tell you what Earth is looking for from this relationship, and then I'd like you to tell me what the Dominion is looking for, and then I'd like us to figure out what those 2 things actually have in common, because I think they have more in common than your original framework assumed, and more in common than we would have if I'd let you run your framework unrevised. Voss said, I agree, please begin. She began. Earth, she explained, was not looking for a patron. It was not looking for a senior civilization to guide it through the complexities of galactic politics. It was not, to be direct, looking for the relationship that the Marathi framework had been designed to offer. Earth had spent 63 years of spaceflight developing its capabilities and its understanding of the galaxy in which it found itself, and it had done so independently, and it intended to continue doing so. What Earth was looking for was a neighbor, a peer relationship with an established civilization that had deep knowledge of this region of space and deep experience navigating the political structures that governed it. Information sharing, mutual recognition, the kind of relationship that allowed both parties to benefit from the other's strengths without either party subordinating itself to the other's framework. Voss listened to all of this and then said, You are describing something that the Marathi Dominion has not been party to in 4,000 years. We do not have peer relationships with other civilizations. We have junior partners, protected species, treaty allies, and adversaries. A genuine peer relationship is outside our institutional experience. I know, Reeves said. It's outside ours too. We've been alone for our entire history. We've never had a neighbor we could learn from. She paused. That's exactly why I think it's worth working toward. Voss looked at her, then at the display wall which still showed the Dominion in orbit, then back at her. What would you need from such a relationship? He said, specifically. Access to your historical knowledge of this region, she said. We've been learning by observation, but observation from the outside is limited. You've been operating here for 4,000 years. You understand the political structures, the species relationships, the history of conflicts and their resolutions, in ways that would take us centuries to develop independently. She paused. In exchange, we offer the same thing, our perspective, which is different from yours in ways that are probably useful. We see this region from the outside, which means we see things that 4,000 years of being inside it have made invisible to you." He was quiet for a moment. "Give me an example." She paused. She had prepared for this question. "The Varath hegemony," she said. "Your diplomatic files on them, which we have read, we should be transparent about that, describe them as a stable regional power with predictable expansion patterns and a reliable treaty record. Our observation of the Varath over the past 11 years suggests that description is 15 years out of date. The Varath are experiencing an internal succession crisis that has not yet become visible in their external behavior, but that is affecting their decision-making in ways that will become significant within 3 to 5 years. Our assessment is that the stable regional power description will not be accurate in 5 years." Voss looked at her steadily. "Where did you get that assessment?" "Our listening has been thorough," she said. "We have analysts who have been following Varath internal communications for 7 years. The patterns are subtle, but they're there." "You've been reading Varath internal communications for 7 years," he said slowly. "We've been listening to everything we could reach for 11 years, she said. "Marathi included. I want to be honest with you about that." He was quiet for a long moment. "What have you learned about us?" "That you are exactly what your history suggests," she said. "A civilization that is very good at what it does, that has been doing it for a long time, and that has not encountered anything in recent centuries that required a fundamental revision of how it does things." She met his eyes. "Until now, possibly." He sat with that. She had expected him to be offended. 300 years old, 47 missions, a civilization that had been the senior presence in this region for longer than Earth had had written language. She had expected some version of the pride that came with that history, some resistance to the suggestion that revision was necessary. Instead, he said, "The Varath succession crisis, tell me more." She told him, specifically, carefully, with the depth that 7 years of focused listening produced. She watched him take it in with the focused attention of someone who is receiving information that connects to things he already knows, that fills gaps he was aware of but had not previously been able to fill. When she finished, he said, "This is consistent with 3 anomalies in Varath diplomatic behavior over the past 8 years that my division flagged as unexplained. We attributed them to internal policy shifts. This would explain them better." "Yes," she said. "You've been doing this for 11 years, he said, "systematically, building a picture of this entire region." "Yes." "And sharing it with no one." "We had no one to share it with," she said, "until now." He looked at the display again, at the Dominion, at the ship that was 2 generations behind current human development, sitting in orbit while a conversation happened below that was itself 2 generations ahead of where the Marathi model had expected it to be. "Secretary Reeves," he said, "I want to propose something." "Go ahead." "Not a framework," he said. "Not a formal diplomatic structure, not a treaty, not an agreement that goes back to our respective governments for review and revision and eventual signing. Not yet." He paused. "A conversation, an extended one. I want to continue this conversation, the specific kind of conversation we are having right now, where both sides say accurate things, for as long as it takes to understand what we are actually talking about. And at the end of it, whatever structure emerges from that understanding will be built on something real." She looked at him. "How long?" "As long as it takes," he said. "I have been doing this for 300 years. I have never said that before. I am saying it now because I think it is accurate." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll clear my schedule." He almost smiled. Not the diplomatic smile he had arrived with, the warm and slightly condescending one, something smaller and more genuine. The smile of someone who has been doing something for a very long time and has just found the version of it that is interesting rather than routine. "So will I," he said. Captain Cole was on his third cup of coffee when Lieutenant Torres came back from the sensor station, with the expression he wore when something was happening that was not quite a problem but required attention. The Marathi escort cruiser changed its holding position, Torres said. Cole looked up. Changed how? Moved 200,000 kilometers closer to Earth, Torres said. Still outside our immediate orbital band, still clearly not aggressive positioning, but closer. He paused. It happened about 40 minutes ago, coincides with the start of the second diplomatic session. Cole thought about that. He thought about what Reeves had told him about the first session, about Voss and the Dominion and the drive specifications, about a 300-year-old diplomat revising his model overnight. The escort commander got orders from Voss, Cole said. That's my read, Torres said. Either Voss told them to move closer, or whatever Voss transmitted to his home base last night produced instructions that got relayed to the escort. It's a signal, Cole said. Yes, sir. Question is what it's signaling. Cole looked at the orbital display, at the Marathi cruiser's new position, at Earth below, at the Dominion around him. He thought about Reeves's instruction: be polite, be non-threatening, maintain posture. He thought about what Voss had said, which Reeves had included in her briefing, that a thing can be significant without being a threat. What's the escort's weapon status? He said. Cold, Torres said. Completely cold. No active targeting, no weapon systems in standby, running minimal power configuration. Cole nodded slowly. They moved closer with their weapons completely cold, he said. Yes, sir. So they're not moving closer to position for a fight, he said. They're moving closer to be seen doing it, to demonstrate they can. He paused. It's a negotiating signal. Voss's delegation is in there having a conversation about what kind of relationship Earth and the Marathi build, and Voss has asked his escort to demonstrate that the Marathi have options, that they're not just here because they want something from us. Torres looked at him. How do you respond to that? Cole thought about it. He looked at the orbital display for a long moment. We don't, he said. We do nothing. We maintain our current position, our current posture, our current power configuration. We don't move toward them, we don't move away, we don't change a single thing. He picked up his coffee. The escort moved closer and the Dominion didn't notice. Not because we missed it, because we saw it and it didn't require a response. That's the signal. Torres was quiet for a moment. That's a very specific signal. Yes, Cole said. I hope Voss is paying attention. Voss was paying attention. He had asked his escort commander to relay the position change directly to him, and he had received the confirmation 12 minutes after it happened, and he had been watching the Dominion's sensor profile through his own team's monitoring equipment ever since. The Dominion had not moved, had not changed its power configuration, had not so much as rotated to face the new position of the Marathi cruiser more directly. He spent 5 minutes thinking about what that meant, and then he turned back to the conversation with Reeves and he said, Your vessel in orbit, the Dominion, what are its captain's orders regarding the diplomatic situation? Reeves said, to be present and to be polite. Nothing more specific. I told him to maintain his current posture and not to do anything aggressive or suggestive, she said. That's all. Voss was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about the Marathi escort commander's position change, which he had ordered specifically to see what the Dominion would do. He was thinking about what the Dominion had done, which was nothing, and what nothing meant. Your captain understood that my escort moving closer was a diplomatic signal, he said. It was not a question. Jake Cole has been running capital ships for 20 years, Reeves said. He understands a great many things. And his response was to do nothing. His response was to not require a response, she said. There's a difference. Voss looked at her. At this woman who had spent 11 years preparing for this conversation and had spent the first session dismantling his model and the second session building something on the ruins of it that was, he was discovering, more interesting than what his model had contained. "You have very good people," he said. "We have people who have been doing difficult things for a long time," she said. "Same as you." "Not the same," he said. "We have been doing these specific things, diplomacy, fleet operations, regional engagement, for 4,000 years. Your people have been doing them for 63. He paused. "The gap between what 63 years should produce and what I am observing is, I keep returning to this. I keep trying to understand it." "What do you think produces it?" she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "Urgency," he said finally. "Not the urgency of crisis, the urgency of knowing that you are young in a very old galaxy. When you are old, when you have been doing this for millennia, there is a comfort in your own frameworks. They have worked before and you trust them to work again. When you are young, you cannot afford that comfort. Every problem is an emergency because you do not have the history to know it will resolve itself." He paused. "That urgency produces a kind of focus that 4,000 years of success has. I will say it plainly. That 4,000 years of success has perhaps softened in us." Reeves looked at him for a moment. Then she said something that was not on any briefing document, not in any prepared statement, not something she had planned to say. She said, "That might be the most useful thing either of us has said in 2 days." He looked at her. "The Marathi Dominion has been the senior presence in this region for so long that the framework you work from has become invisible to you," she said. "You don't see it as a framework, you see it as reality, the way things are. And the way things are is shaped by 4,000 years of Marathi experience and Marathi perspective and Marathi assumptions about how civilizations develop and what they need." She paused. "We don't see it that way. We see it as a framework. We can see the edges of it because we're outside it." She met his eyes. "And you can see the edges of our thinking in ways we can't, because you've been doing this for 4,000 years and you know what young civilizations miss." He was very still. "That's the thing we both have that the other one needs," she said. "Not my intelligence reports on the Verath, not your historical knowledge of this region. The actual thing is the ability to see each other's frameworks from the outside." She paused. "That's what a peer relationship is. That's what makes it worth building." The room was quiet. Voss sat in the particular stillness of someone who has just heard something that is going to change how they think about their work going forward. Not a dramatic shift, not a sudden revelation. The specific quiet of someone whose understanding has just deepened by exactly one layer, and who is sitting with the weight of that layer settling into place. Then he said, "I want to introduce you to someone." She raised an eyebrow. "Escort Commander," he said, "Admiral Thurin. She has been with the Marathi fleet for 180 years. She has more operational experience in this region than anyone else in my delegation." He paused. "I want her and your Captain Cole to have a conversation. Not a diplomatic conversation, a professional one. Ship commanders talking to each other about the things ship commanders know." He met Reeves's eyes. "If we are going to build something real, it needs to be real at every level. Not just at the diplomatic table." Reeves thought about this. About Cole on the Dominion, 3 fresh cups of coffee into his shift, watching the Marathi cruiser move closer and choosing to not notice. About Thurin, 180 years of fleet experience, holding position 200,000 kilometers closer than before with her weapons completely cold. "I'll make the introduction," she said. The conversation between Cole and Thurin happened over a secure channel that evening. Neither Reeves nor Voss was present for it, by mutual agreement. They received summaries afterward, but the summaries were the diplomatic version of something that was more interesting in the original. Cole and Thurin spent 40 minutes talking about drive systems, which was how ship commanders started conversations about capabilities without asking directly about capabilities. Thurin's Sovereign class had an FTL drive that was 3 generations older than the Dominion's. She knew this. Cole knew this. Neither of them said it. They talked about the engineering principles and the operational requirements and the trade-offs involved, and in doing so they said it completely without saying it. Then they spent 20 minutes talking about the 200,000-kilometer position change. Thurin said, "Your response to our position adjustment was to make no response." Cole said, "The situation didn't require one." Thurin said, "That is either very confident or very naive." Cole said, "We've been watching your cruiser since before it dropped out of FTL. Your weapons have been cold the whole time. Your power configuration is minimal. You moved closer to make a point, not to position for engagement." He paused. "A response would have been to play the game your move was designed to start. We didn't want to play that game." Thurin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why not?" Cole thought about it. "Because we're not here to show you what we can do," he said. "You can figure that out on your own. We're here because the people on the station below us are trying to build something, and the most useful thing I can do is not create a situation that distracts from what they're building." And if we had been positioning for engagement, then the situation would have required a response, he said simply. "But you weren't." Another pause. "How did you know we weren't?" 180 years of experience commanding ships, Cole said. "You don't do things without reasons. You moved closer and went cold. You wanted to be seen, not to fight." He paused. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I recognize the difference." Thurin was quiet for a longer moment. Then she said something that was not in the summary she sent to Voss, something she said, and then considered and decided was accurate and left in when she revised the summary. She said, "You are not what we expected." Cole said, "We get that a lot." She said, "How do you know we don't mean it as a complaint?" He said, "Because you're still talking to me." She said after a pause, "Yes, we are." The formal sessions continued for 3 more days. By the end of them, the document that emerged was not the Marathi framework Voss had arrived with. It was not the specific peer relationship structure Reeves had opened with. It was something that had been negotiated, genuinely, with both sides giving and receiving in roughly equal measure, into a form that neither party had fully anticipated at the start. It was called, in its final version, the Framework for Regional Partnership, and it established mutual recognition, information sharing protocols, joint consultation requirements for major regional decisions, and a conflict resolution structure that did not assume either party's primacy. It also established the permanent Marathi liaison office on Earth that Voss had decided to recommend, and a corresponding permanent human diplomatic presence at the Marathi Dominion's capital. It was not a small document. It was not a simple one. It had been argued over in significant detail, revised 11 times, and had required 3 late nights of the kind of difficult conversation that produced things worth having. On the last day, before the signing, Voss stood at the viewport corridor with Reeves and looked at the Dominion. "The ship that was 2 generations behind," he said. "Yes," she said. "What's the current generation's name?" She looked at him. "That information is in the briefing document we provided." "I read the briefing document," he said. "I'm asking you." She paused for a moment. "The Resolute," she said. "She's been in service for 4 months." He looked at the Dominion, at the ship that was, by his own assessment, significantly beyond what any Marathi model had projected Earth would have at this point. "Where is she?" he said. "Patrol assignment," Reeves said. "She's in the outer system right now." "Our outer system?" "Earth's outer system," she said. He was quiet. "How many?" She looked at him. "How many what?" "Titan-class vessels," he said. "You mentioned the Dominion was not your largest active vessel. You mentioned current generation is 2 generations ahead. I am asking how many ships of the classes we are discussing are currently in active service." Reeves was quiet for a moment. She had not prepared for this question specifically, which was unusual for her. She had prepared for most questions. This one she had left open because the answer was classified above the level of what she had intended to share in these sessions, and because she had not been certain the question would come directly enough to require a direct answer. It had come directly. She thought about what Voss had said on the first day. He had said the framework he built was on an incomplete model and that accurate information was required. He had said he was past the point where indirect communication was useful. She had agreed. She said, "Enough." He turned to look at her. "Not a specific number," she said. "That's genuinely classified and I'm not in a position to give it to you today. But the word I would use to describe the quantity is enough." She met his eyes. "Enough that the framework we built over the past 4 days is a genuine peer relationship and not a generous gesture from a senior party to a junior one. Enough that when you go back to the Marathi Dominion and recommend the suspension of the 3 expansion initiatives you told your planning division about last night." She held his gaze steadily. "The recommendation will be based on an accurate understanding of the situation." He was very still. "You read my transmission," he said. "We've been listening thoroughly for 11 years, she said. "I told you that on the first day." He looked at her for a long moment. He was 300 years old and he had sat across from a great many difficult people in a great many difficult conversations, and he had almost never found himself uncertain about how to respond. He was uncertain now. Not because she had read his transmission. He had understood that was possible when she told him about the listening. Not because the number was classified. He understood classification. But because of the word she had used. Enough. The specific, precise, carefully chosen word that answered the question without answering it, that said exactly what needed to be said without saying more. That was the diplomatic equivalent of the Dominion not moving when his escort cruiser changed position. She was very good. He had spent 4 days discovering that she was very good, and he was still finding new evidence. "Secretary Reeves," he said. "Ambassador Voss, I want to tell you something that is not in any diplomatic document and will not be in any transmission I send home." "All right," she said. "In 300 years of this work," he said, "I have twice encountered a species that required me to revise my fundamental model, not update my existing model, revise it completely, throw away the structure and build something new." He looked at the Dominion. Both of those revisions were difficult. Both of them were, in retrospect, among the most important things I did in this work. He paused. "This is the third." She said nothing. "The framework we signed today is good," he said. "It's real. I believe it will hold." He paused. "What I want to tell you is that the reason I believe it will hold is not the document. Documents hold when they are convenient. What makes this one hold is that both sides understand what they are actually dealing with, which is something the document did not create. It described something that already existed because of what happened in this room over the past 4 days." He looked at her. "You could have given me the accurate model at the beginning. You could have opened by showing me the specifications, the numbers, the full picture. Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because accurate information delivered before someone is ready to receive it isn't accurate," she said. "It's noise. You needed to arrive at the question yourself. The Dominion in orbit was enough to make you ask the question. The rest followed from the question." He looked at her steadily. "You managed the pace of information." "Yes," she said. "Deliberately." "Yes. For 4 days you have been telling me that honesty and directness are the basis of what we're building," he said. "And you managed the pace of information." "Managing the pace of information is not dishonesty," she said. "I told you everything you asked. I offered you things before you asked when I thought you needed them. I did not tell you things you hadn't asked when telling you would have produced a reaction rather than a reception." She paused. "That's not deception. That's the actual work." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Yes, it is." They stood at the viewport for another few minutes. The Dominion held its orbit. Below them, Earth turned in the slow blue rotation of a planet that had been doing this for 4.5 billion years, and had, in the last 63 of them, produced something that a 300-year-old Marathi ambassador was standing at a viewport, thinking about in ways he had not thought about anything in a long time. "The signing is in an hour," Reeves said. "Yes," he said. "After the signing, your delegation returns to Marathi space." "Yes." "And then the real work begins," she said. "The liaison offices, the information sharing protocols, the joint consultation structure." She paused. "It will be complicated." "Everything worth doing is complicated," he said. She looked at him. "You know, for someone who arrived smiling like he was doing us a favor, you've turned out to be very reasonable." He was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time in 4 days, he laughed. A real laugh, not the diplomatic warmth of his professional smile, something genuine, slightly surprised by itself, the laugh of someone who has just heard something accurate and finds the accuracy funny. "I was doing you a favor," he said. "I simply underestimated the difficulty of the task." She smiled, not the carefully managed expression of a diplomat in session, a real one. "You did fine." "I revised my model twice," he said. "3 times," she said. "I was counting." He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite the expression of an ambassador, and not quite the expression of an old man who has been doing difficult work for a very long time and has just found a colleague. It was both. "The signing," he said. "Yes," she said. "Let's go sign it." They walked back down the viewport corridor, the Dominion enormous and patient outside the glass, the stars behind it holding their light the way they always did, and the door at the end of the corridor opened, and they went through it into the room where the document was waiting, and they signed it, and the thing they had built over 4 days became the thing it had already been since some time on the second day when neither of them was looking. Jake Cole got the notification from Reeves 2 hours after the signing. He was on the bridge, midway through his evening review when her message came through. It was short. It said, "Framework signed. Mission accomplished. Thank you for being exactly what you needed to be." He read it twice. Then he looked at the orbital display, at Earth below, at the space where the Marathi escort cruiser had been, which was now empty. The cruiser had departed with the diplomatic shuttle an hour ago, heading home. Torres was at his station. "We got the all clear." "We got the all clear," Cole confirmed. "Good session." Cole thought about the drive specifications document, about Voss revising his transmission twice in one evening, about Thurin saying, "You are not what we expected," and Cole saying, "We get that a lot." "Good session," he said. Torres nodded. He started running the standard departure checklist, because the diplomatic mission was over and the Dominion had a patrol assignment to return to. "Sir," Torres said, midway through the checklist. "Yeah. What do you think they expected?" Cole looked at the orbital display, at Earth, at the space where the Marathi cruiser had been. "Someone who needed the framework they brought," he said. "And what did they get?" Cole thought about Reeves and the word enough. About 4 days of a conversation that neither side had fully anticipated and both sides had built anyway. About the thing Voss had said, which Reeves had included in her summary. "This is the 3rd time in 300 years I have had to revise my fundamental model." "Something better," he said. He finished his coffee. It was actually warm this time. The Dominion broke orbit at 2200 hours, her engines running at the quiet efficiency of something that didn't need to perform because what it was spoke clearly enough without performance, and she moved out into the deep, and the stars received her the way the stars received everything that moved through them, without judgment, without surprise, with the patient permanence of things that have been there for a very long time, and will be there long after the small, consequential, occasionally remarkable things that happen between them have run their course. Below, on a station that would eventually be remembered as the place where something started, the document sat in its archive, signed and real, the beginning of a thing that both sides would spend the next several decades discovering was more significant than they had known when they built it. And in the Marathi Diplomatic Archive, filed under First Contact Revision, Earth, the final notation, added 6 months later by an archivist who had read Voss's complete transmission record, said simply, "Assessment note, this civilization does not behave like a civilization 63 years into spaceflight. It behaves like a civilization that has been preparing for spaceflight for considerably longer and has been doing it very fast. Recommend treating all future projections as minimum estimates." The notation was accurate. It was also, as notations about humanity tended to be, somewhat behind the current situation. That was all right, the Marathi were learning. So was everyone else. The end.